6 kilos of sugar, which is half of one of these buckets. Put that there. I'm also going to use 3 kilos of liquid glucose, which is probably about a third of one of these buckets. We need to reach a temperature of 154 degrees Celsius, which we have already done at the back here on the hot plate. So I'm going to bring the sugar over to the table in front of me. This table is called the cold setting table. I'll explain that in just a second. So obviously we have bars in place here. That's to hold the sugar on the table, stop it from falling over, and then the right hand bar, that's just to lock it in place so it can cool down. So the first ingredient we use is the food colouring, as it stirs in the easiest. The sugar is quite dark today, it's because we've used a different sugar, so we're hoping that the yellow still comes out nicely. So once the food colouring's in, just going to take the spatula, stir it around. There we are. So the next thing we're going to use is a powder, which I have to my right, and the reason we use this is because you can't pour the flavour directly into the sugar because it will evaporate and there'll be no flavouring left in the sweets. So we're going to use some dextrose powder. Now you'll find this in stuff like Lucozades or other energy drinks, and of course other sweets. So we use this at the base, and I'm just going to layer it on the bottom with a nice generous amount. Dextrose powder doesn't really affect the flavouring of the sweet. It's just simply there to absorb and take in all of the lemon flavouring I'm about to pour on top. So in these little cups we have the flavouring. We'll do some at the bottom with a nice generous amount. We'll also use some on the top half. And today we're also going to use a different powder, which we're going to sprinkle over the top. Now this powder, this one does affect the taste. This is citric acid. This one will make the sweets taste more sour, and it will perk the flavour up a little bit more. So we'll give a nice generous amount just on the top, and then I'm going to stir this all in. So you'll start to notice as well the yellow colour starts to come out a little bit more, and that's help from the dextrose. So it doesn't matter too much how finely stirred in it is, because later on the sugar will be folded into each other and the dextrose and the citric acid will mix itself in. So also now, obviously I mentioned earlier, this thing called the cold setting table. The reason being is obviously we've got these pipes running down here, which have come from a water drum at the back. And what that's doing is pumping cold water all the way around under the table, which is helping my sugar cool down a lot quicker and a lot easier. Because if you were to let it cool naturally, especially in some of the weathers we've been having where it's quite warm and quite humid, it will take a long time for the sugar to cool. So I'm going to make sure it's firm enough on one side. I'm going to pull the bar away, like so. I'm going to take my scissors, go all around the edges, lifting the sugar from the bars.
That's interesting. That's nice.
I'm just going to fold it over. And I'm going to use some of this powder here on my gloves. This is called Italian talc. It's not like your regular talcum powder you'll find at home. It's specifically made for foods, and it does incredibly well at making sure the sugar doesn't stick to my gloves when I'm handling it. So it's still incredibly warm, incredibly hot. So we're just going to fold it back over, the more solid side on the top, and then the liquid side will then harden again underneath, forming a sort of skin. So sometimes when we're making other sweets, for instance, say we're making a strawberry and cream or rhubarb and custard, there's two sides to those sweets and there's two colours. So as you saw earlier, I put a yellow in on the whole thing. Normally if we were doing a sweet like that, we'd cut it in half. We'd have the red at the top and the yellow at the bottom. You'd then split it in half and then you'd have two sweet makers handling two separate pieces of sugar. So what I'm going to keep doing now is simply just folding the sugar over, putting the cooler part back into the centre, and then the hot part go back over the top. So this is probably the longer process of making the sweets, it's just letting it cool down. Because obviously it is at around 154 degrees when it comes off the hot plate, and we want it to reach about 60 or 70 degrees. At the moment we're probably at around 110 to 100 degrees. So I'm still just going to keep folding it over. And then it sink back down. So again, if we were doing another sweet with 2 halves and we had 2 sweet makers, sometimes one side of the sugar will cool before the other. However, it's not too much of a problem, as we do have another table, as you can see to my left, opposite to the cold table. That is called the hot table. Reason being, it's under those white sheets on the table. There are some heated plates which are generating about 40 degrees of heat. So what that does is when the sugar's left there to rest, it doesn't solidify too much and become too hard.